So as tradition, I just like to start off with a little bit of a very, very high level introduction into the insurance world. And I'm going to also just for a moment here, I'm going to make sure that I record this because we are going to be using it. So, and admit. There we go. Sorry about that, folks. Back on track. Great. So for those of you who are not familiar with insurance and what Career Connections does, I'm Beverly and I work with the Insurance Career Connections. We do a lot of outreach to individuals who are not familiar with the insurance industry to help them understand what insurance is about. And hopefully from there, meet our professionals, engage with us at events, and hopefully choose a career in insurance because we find it a little bit exciting. We are a little bit biased, but we really do believe that there's great things in store in the insurance world. From types of insurance, we like to categorize it into kind of three main buckets. And one being life and health, which again, for those who unfortunately, in terms of untimely death, accidents, sickness, life and health insurance is there to help our loved ones or families get back on their feet. Social insurance, generally speaking, is government administered programs. So things like here in Ontario, we have OHIP for medical and hospital coverage. There might be workers' compensation, employment insurance. Those are all government administered programs, again, to help our communities in times of need. But where Career Connections and our work really lies is in the property and casualty side of the business. And property and casualty really incorporates everything. So everything outside of that life and health and social insurance. So you can be talking about sports, you can be talking about government, you can be talking about agriculture, aviation, marine, you name it. So anything in society basically needs insurance, and the property and casualty side of the business really insures those areas. What we like to boast at Career Connections is that we have over 140,000 professionals across Canada in the P&C sector. Most of the people that you'll talk to in the insurance industry really enjoy what they do. They understand the big picture, and most of them stay within the industry. So that's a great stat to boast. Despite what many people think in terms of an older and aging industry, we actually are having our Gen Z, along with our millennials, take up the big chunk of our workforce within the next 10 years. The P&C industry also has salaries that are very competitive when you look at other financial sectors and you look at the trajectory and the advancement opportunities that are available within the industry rather rapidly as compared to the other financial sectors. And we are a well-educated industry. And also we boast a lot of diversity in terms of our industry as well. As mentioned, part of our Insurance 101 is looking at so many different roles that cover the insurance industry. And this chart is really just to show that we're all interconnected in some way, some form or fashion. This particular chart, don't try and make an actual map out of it. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but this is why we have our experts here tonight to really demystify and show how everyone is connected in the insurance ecosystem. What we also want to do is just describe a little bit about, and once we talk with Matt and Thomas this evening, we'll hear a little bit about how the risk manager role is very unique, I'd like to say. and hopefully they will be able to help us understand the puzzle of it all. When you think of, I like to bring it back to just ourselves and just our everyday lives. When I think about myself and I think about insurance, I'm usually connected in one of a couple of ways, either through a broker or maybe through my direct insurance company. And I'm thinking very simply in terms of, my property or my auto insurance. But when we think of our folks in the risk management side of things, what we do see is that risk managers are really working with a lot of organizations as their clients. And not only that, they are connected in so many different ways. And when I say here, the client, the organization, that might be a variety of departments within that organization. They're also looking at risk in terms of the claims that maybe that organization has. The broker is going to affect that organization's ability to get insurance. So I'm hoping that this is a very simplified version, Matt and Thomas, that you'll be able to, again, deconstruct for all of us on the line today. In addition, I did want to just talk about the roles of the risk manager, generally speaking. And Julia here is part of our new branding, where we simply say that a risk manager assesses all aspects of risk, employs measures to limit losses and increase resiliency, and you seek to eliminate the root cause of potential problems and exploit the upside of risk. You're really identifying potential causes of accidents or losses, recommend and implement preventative measures, plans to minimize cost, damage should a loss occur, including the purchase of insurance, and coordinating loss control systems for organizations and businesses, which may include disaster recovery plans and emergency evacuations. So that's a whole lot. And I think what's exciting today is that we have some fantastic risk managers. And I love when I have representation from coast to coast. And so we have Thomas Ng, who is out in BC. And we have Matt Dickinson, who's actually in Denver. So we are excited to have them. And I'm going to actually have each of them just give a little introduction on themselves. Thomas, maybe we'll start with you.
Thank you, Beverly. Hi, my name is Thomas Ng. I am the risk manager at City of Richmond in British Columbia. So a little bit about myself. This is actually a relatively new role for me. Only 3 years in, I'm still a baby as the risk manager. However, before that, I spent about 16, 17 years in insurance, primarily in claims and brokerage side of things. I also have been teaching for 14 years for the Insurance Institute. So know a little bit about everything, but not master any. So hopefully I can actually shed some light what I do for a living with you guys today. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas. And Matt, how about you? A little introduction on yourself.
Sure. So I'm Matt. As Beverly mentioned, I'm right now in Denver, but I still consider Halifax my home right now because I'm only here for a year and then I'll be moving back there. I got into risk management a few years ago with Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis, actually, managing their risk management or involved in their risk management and business continuity programs. At which point I moved out to Halifax and I was the risk manager of a university out there for a few years. And then have just recently started with the city of Halifax out there before this little disruption in my life. But prior to that, I worked in insurance for a little while. But before that, I worked in IT for a lot of years. So I'm not sure if I would say that I have one specific background. It's more of an amassing of skills over time.
That's awesome. Thank you, Matt. And I think what's great about the discussion today is that each of you bring a number of different experiences in the risk management space. And so I think for those on the line here today can really get a good sense of how risk management can span so many different areas and so many types of businesses. Some points for discussion tonight, for those of you who have witnessed my sessions on Insurance 101. I'd like to just touch base on a number of areas, and definitely leave it open for some great questions from those of us on the line, for Matt and Thomas. But I thought I'd start off by just simply put, like how does your day look from a risk management standpoint? And I know it's going to be different for each of you, but Matt, maybe we could start with you in terms of what's your day in the life look like?
It's a little different every day. But in general, like with the risk management program, once it's fully established and has kind of matured, like you kind of go through different phases throughout the year, because you'll usually spend some time hosting workshops to help different areas of the business you're supporting update their risk information and that sort of thing. You'll spend some time collecting that information and processing it and analyzing it a little bit and sort of putting it into reporting and that sort of thing. Other parts of the year, we'll spend time developing new programs. So like I've been involved with developing risk-based budgeting and risk-based finance. So in order to get financial approval for any new initiatives within an organization, you go through a risk assessment process. I help put together risk-based auditing, and that's more related to the public sector. But when you have internal audit functions or auditor general functions, a lot of their practices are directly correlated with identifying risks in the areas that they're auditing. So helping to build sort of a more harmonious cycle between those two has really helped to, number one, drive their reporting and recommendations, and number two, drive our adoption of their recommendations, which has been really helpful. And then getting to work with all of the different people across the organization. So like working with IT security or cybersecurity, occupational health and safety, finance and internal controls, like any of those specialized risk functions, those second line risk functions across the organization, and trying to calibrate them to one set of standards to use so that we're all speaking the same language across the organization. So it's a little bit different every day. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, for sure. And Thomas, from your perspective, because you're with like more on the city side, government side of things, how would you say your day is structured?
Just like what Matt said, not every day is different, right? I can actually be working on an insurance renewal today, and then tomorrow I'll be like talking to a whole bunch of people about risk, right? Try to update information, and then maybe the third day I'll be doing business continuity plans, kind of help to develop that type of program. And then and throughout the day, me and my team will be working on reviewing contracts, reviewing certificate of insurance. Some risk manager also actually handle the claims function as well. So it really depends on depends on the organization itself, right? Obviously, the bigger city that you are actually working in, the more defined your role may be. But the smaller the municipality, the government is, probably you just have to do everything, right? I always actually kind of make a joke that anybody can throw the word risk behind it, it can become my problem. So, it just, every day is different. But I want to actually add one more thing to what Matt was actually saying. His background was from IT. This is kind of a big thing these days, right? Cybersecurity and all those type of things is kind of one big topic. It's not just kind of the traditional insurable risk that we will be looking at. Like it could be from a strategic point of view, resiliency point of view, efficiency point of view. So.
I wanted to, something that you mentioned, Thomas, just in terms of risk, anything can be risk. And if we can just talk a little bit about just demystifying that word risk, because that can mean anything to either of you. Like, what are you, sounds silly, but what are you looking for? What's your what are the risks that you're dealing with?
So maybe I take a jab on this one first, Matt. So this is actually usually what I teach people in my class. When you say risk, you always actually associate with something negative, right? So it could be, you always say risk of getting cancer, risk of dying, risk of something negative, right? On the other side, you may say something positive and say, oh, you have a chance of winning $10 million, right? Nobody's going to complain about it because everybody's happy about it, right? But, in a general sense, to me, anything associated with risk is anything that is negative that can happen. Now, that could be physical risk, liability risk, cyber, like I said, it could be operational, strategic, it could be reputational, financial, right? So it could be anything. So sometimes, at least my job, I have to kind of like put that into different buckets and try to get people to focus on certain aspects, because otherwise it will be just too broad and people just got lost very easily.
Yeah, that's what I sense. Whenever you hear the word risk, it just sounds so broad. So Matt, from your perspective, what would you say?
I think you guys kind of hit the nail on the head with the risk of the definition of risk, which is that it's completely variable. And so when I think about risk, I generally lean towards more of the ISO-COSO definitions of it, which are more about uncertainty. And because I generally work with enterprise risk programs, we're not necessarily looking at downside risk all the time. We're not looking at negativity. We're looking at what is our objective, and then what is the variability from achieving that objective. So, on the one hand, if our objective is to deliver one specific service and we way overachieve that, in some cases, people would be very happy with that. In other cases, it means that you've maybe inappropriately overfinanced that function. And so that money that you put in there, maybe you could have spent less on that program to get what your intended objective was and spent that money on a second objective or on one that isn't getting resourced the same way. So really looking at what causes the variability in outcomes is what we look at for risk. That being said, like, the word risk is defined across all these different standards. So if you look at, as I said, like ISO and COSO standards from an enterprise risk standpoint, they're more about that uncertainty of objectives. If you look at other risk frameworks like business continuity, emergency management, even cyber risk and stuff like that, they're more threat oriented, which is still the negative side of it. There really isn't an upside to breaking your leg, or there isn't really an upside to, like your building burning down or your assets being frozen in a cyber attack. Like, there's not really an upside. So in some cases, those other risk functions may take a very one-sided approach to it and really focus on averting the negative.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about enterprise risk management as opposed to other risk management?
Yeah, so enterprise risk management is generally looking at all of those risk functions across an organization and taking a portfolio view of how all of these different categories of risk, how all of these different risk approaches are being handled across a larger organization. So you might look at things like, rather than take a traditional or an operational risk approach to things, where it's really more focused on like, what are our business services and what can go wrong when we deliver those business services, what can go wrong that can prevent us from achieving our objectives in those business services. The enterprise risk portfolio takes experts from legal services and financial services and business continuity planning and emergency services and all of those different functions and calibrates them. So you have the experts who, know a heck of a lot more than me with IT, or know way more than me about finance, or whatever the case is, actually doing and operating their risk assessments and their risk management within their specific scope. But then I come in to help to calibrate them so that we're using the same rating scales and we're using sort of a comprehensive reporting structure so that no one risk is being reported in a way that it gets all the attention, whereas maybe something over here isn't getting the same attention, but is equally as important to the organization's objectives.
Interesting. And Thomas, from your perspective, like from a government perspective, how do you find your role in terms of risk and risk management?
I think there are two parts to this. From a traditional, like Matt was putting, like operational risk point of view, I will be kind of seen as this consultant advisor to upper management. But from an enterprise point of view, also like what Matt was actually saying, is we can't know everything, right? Like I may know a little bit about cyber insurance because of my previous role, but I don't know what they're talking about. Like that's different language to me, right? So I have to work with IT team, right? If I actually dealing with a natural disaster, I have to work with the fire department, the emergency planning people, right? So try to kind of bring all the experts together in one room, help you assess, document it, and then. So I think what I'm trying to say is actually about that stakeholder engagement, about like with all different groups, right? So I think that's actually kind of that's how I see my role as a risk manager.
Nice. What would you say makes a successful risk manager? Because it sounds like you're putting programs together, you have like an analytical, critical eye. What do you think the skill set is for someone who wants to get into risk management? Either one of you.
You go first, Thomas.
Okay. I would say, okay, this is actually kind of how I was actually literally having a conversation with somebody today at lunch. There's no one set of qualification or kind of like skill set that will actually kind of make you to be a successful risk manager. To be honest, obviously, if you have, insurance background, that would be great because that actually is portion of it, but it's only a small portion of it. I think it's actually analytical skill, like you put it, communication skill. Also, the other thing I think is actually very crucial these days is project management. Some risk manager job would like to have IT background, accounting background, audit background, internal audit background type of thing, right? So all these things actually kind of bring a set of skill that will help you to be successful. Now, again, I have to actually kind of emphasize it to everybody on the call. Like, you're not expected to have all these skill right up front, but the more checkbox that you have, the more likely you can be successful. That's my opinion.
Anything to add, Matt?
I totally agree. And like I like to say that especially when I'm doing risk engagements and stuff like that, and engaging with other experts, one of the first things that I generally preface the conversation with is like, I love being the dumbest person in the room. I ask a lot of questions, and there's a guy, he was the program director for, one of the diplomas that I did in my past life. And he was talking about it in IT terms. But he used to say that the mark of any true professional is the ability to take technical information and translate it into the technical language of another professional and be that conduit for information. And that was over 20 years ago that I heard that advice, and I still use it every day, because like I am not the person to tell an engineer how to manage risk in their designs. I'm not the person to tell our IT team how to manage risk when it comes to our cloud exposure or our cyber exposures. I'm not that guy, but I know enough about all those things to ask questions. And so, like, to Thomas's point, like, I'm constantly learning because of that. So since getting into risk management, I've taken designations for project management, for change management, I've redone all of my IT certs because they were 20 years old and they were obsolete. I've gone through and tried to learn a little bit about all of those different things. Right now, I'm working on like an internal audit designation and stuff like that, so that I can work closer with auditors and help to understand their kind of approach. but it's like, you kind of have to always be willing to learn and admit that you don't have all the answers and work with the people that do have those answers.
Great point. And you mentioned, which is a great segue into designations. And I'm hearing this theme of IT and project management, but what designations to be a risk manager? If anyone were on the line to explore, what do you think is their first step in terms of education or designations or licensing, etc.?
I think it depends on the role that they're looking at. Like if you're looking at an enterprise risk role, usually they're looking for more of an accounting or audit background because it's the universal language of businesses. If you're looking at IT risk functions, they're going to want you to have some IT risk designations, usually like CISA is one of them, CISA, or CISM is the other one. CRISC, I don't know how to pronounce any of these, so I just pronounce them as they are, but there's a whole bunch of different designations that are IT specific. If you want to do business continuity planning, the Business Continuity Institute and Disaster Recovery Institute both have the BCI and the CBCI are their core designations. But it's like most functions have a risk-related designation. The CRM one is a great designation as your core competencies, your risk generalist. If you want to know the basics of the risk of all of these risk frameworks, the cycle that they go through, and a quick highlight of like how to do, like what are some types of risk assessment techniques and stuff like that. The CRM is actually a great kind of core one to start with to see if it is a good fit for you. And then all of those other ones you can build off of as time goes on and you build some expertise.
That's awesome. Thomas, I wanted to talk to you about career transition because you've actually done it. What made you transition? How did you transition? How was the process?
In terms of transition, it was actually more a personal reason that I want to actually move to public sector. Risk management is actually one of the things that I always thought of. I never even thought that I would be one day. But in 2021, my dad and also my father-in-law both got diagnosed with cancer. And so I started to actually kind of think, okay, you know what? There are a lot of uncertainty in life, right? Unfortunately, my father-in-law did not survive. My dad actually survived the treatment and everything. So, you know, thank God for that. But at the same time, you know, we have some loss. Anyway, that kind of just gave me a new reality check, right? What am I doing with my life? I want to do something a little bit more meaningful, you know, in terms of like I'm contributing to, you know, society of other people around me, right? So that's kind of where, how I make the transition. So for me, like I said, because I actually kind of have different, I have been with different role within the insurance industry. I did underwriting, claims, broking, and I also actually even study actuarial science for like a year type of thing, right? So I kind of know a little bit about everything, but not quite. So I think it's actually kind of an easier transition for me. However, with that said, like what Matt was actually saying, it's still a learning curve. Every day is different, and the skill set that you actually build every single day will actually help you throughout your career and as a risk manager.
Matt, how did you get your start?
I like to refer to myself, I've heard different ways of phrasing this. Intact used to talk about the squiggly line career path that would take you all over the place. I prefer to refer to myself as a tumbleweed. Really, like every role that I've had, back to my IT days, like I've kind of looked at it in terms of like, I never had a lot of direction on what I wanted to do. But as I go through, I'm pretty analytical with myself as well. So I look at every job, every role that I'm in, I look at what do I like, what don't I like, and what should I try differently next time. And so when I found insurance, I fell into insurance liking the restorative aspect of it. I was doing some consultation for content replacement valuations. And I liked seeing people start at a terrible point in their life, and as their claim gets handled, as their claim gets resolved, you can see them become the person they used to be before, which was a really rewarding process to be a part of. After dealing with that for a bit, I realized I hate meeting people on the worst day of their life. And it's really emotionally taxing to meet people going through really heavy stuff. But that sort of opened my eyes to like, well, there's a lot of things that we can do to prevent things from happening in the first place. And that's what got me interested in risk management. So I started taking courses for risk management, for business continuity planning, for stuff like that. And I started transitioning to that. The first risk management position I was in did our enterprise risk management program, their business continuity planning program, and their legislative compliance program. And two of those I didn't care for quite as much. I was pretty good at the business continuity stuff, especially with my IT background, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. So my next one, I focused more on the risk management. And I always kind of look at, yeah, what parts of the job do I like? And how can I find a job that includes more of that and less of the stuff that I don't like?
Which is interesting that both of you had a part in your life where it was a bit of self-reflection, looking for something different, something more, which leads into a bit of the work-life balance and hours that each of you deal with the risk management role. How would you describe that, Matt?
I think in business continuity, my work-life balance was a little bit worse, because if something bad actually does happen and you're the business continuity officer, you're the one coordinating all the action and all the resourcing and stuff like that, which is demanding. Emergencies don't just happen during business hours. From an enterprise risk standpoint, work-life balance is great, because there's very few things that are an emergency. Like, even if a risk happens, it's not my job to prevent risks. It's not my job to fix risks once they do happen. It's my job to collect information about risks so that decision makers have the right information in front of them to make future decisions on them, to plan the business around them. But it's like, we've got people that are more involved with the actual response of things and that sort of thing. So I would say it's pretty good. As long as you're resourced appropriately, I guess.
And Thomas, how about you?
I would say, you know what? Let me just say this, like work-life balance, for the public sector side, sometimes it could be a little bit challenging. Especially there's so much going on in the municipal government. And sometimes we actually have to even work at night to go to different committees, different council meetings, and meet with the mayors and stuff like that in the middle, like kind of after hours, if you will, right? But overall, I think work-life balance is there. You just have to kind of find your wisdom. You have to actually kind of find what works for you and how you can actually balance your workload. And also, you quickly learn you actually have to, how to build a business case to get more resource, right? And try to get somebody to help you with your projects and stuff. So
awesome. I wanted to ask another question before I jump to some of the questions we have in the chat. What can you tell us about salaries? I know there's probably a number of different, roles and different types of, ranges, but can you give us a, sneak peek?
Yeah, I think number one, it really relates to roles again, like what types of roles you're looking at. If you're looking at like a specialized like IT risk role or legal risk role, usually they want someone with an IT background or a legal background in those. So generally speaking, there's a bit of a premium that's paid on those things. Like you can get into them in the like high 80s to 90s to well into the six figures. For more generalist roles, for an entry-level risk analyst, I've seen it as low as like 35,000 a year, which brings a tear to my eyes given how much experience they generally actually want from people. But you'll see those postings out there. I think most of the public sector stuff that I've seen more recently is sort of like for a risk analyst, you'd start somewhere in the 60s and cap out 80s to 90s. When you get into management roles, you'd start probably 70 to 80 and go to over 100,000, but how deep into that is up to the organization, I think. Chief risk officer roles, I think, are a little bit variable as well. Like some of them are chief risk officer and title only, so you're more of a program manager in the $100,000 a year range, whereas some of them are true C-suite executives and they make substantially more.
For sure. Does that relate on the public sector side, Thomas? Is that kind of in par?
I think obviously Canada is a big country, right? So
Yeah,
there may be
regional
like different
differences.
regional pricing and stuff. But just kind of like as a reference here in BC, public sector, just so everybody knows, all our salary, if you are earning above certain amount, is public record. You can actually look us up like what we're making per year, right? But in general, I would say if you are starting as an analyst, you probably be looking at around 65, 80 type of range. And then, kind of one step up, maybe a senior analyst, or maybe sometimes what we call project manager type of role. We may be talking about upper 90 to 100, 110 range. And then if you're talking about like a risk manager, probably starting from 115 to 130, 140 type of range. Like Matt was saying, like chief risk officer, it depends. Sometimes actually I looked at a couple of jobs, recently. Usually probably start from 160 to like even 200. I see.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
That's actually on the public sector side, kind of regional specific too, right? So
Of course. Yeah, but that gives us a good sense. Thank you both for that. Matt, just going back to what you said earlier, Justin had a question about some of the certifications you mentioned. He knows there was the CRM you mentioned.
Yep.
And I think you had also mentioned some other IT related ones, designations.
Yeah, so ISACA is one of the organizations, ISACA. So they have their CISA is one of them. It's the Certified Information Systems Auditor, and they've got CISM, which is the Certified Information Systems Manager, I believe. And those are both pretty recognized. There's the CRISC, CRISC, which is, who does CRISC? Oh, that's ISACA as well. So that's their certification for information systems risk. There's the CRMA through the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is the Certified in Risk Management Assurance. So that's more evaluating the risk management functions and the risk management programs themselves. What else is there? I mean, there's a lot like PMP, or not PMP, PMI is the same organization that oversees the PMP designation. I believe they have one for project risk now as well. And then what's also interesting is that most other designations have a risk component to it. So like if you're looking at the CPA curriculum, a lot of what they do is risk management. Most of it's formed around the COSO framework, but they're cooked into there. Same thing with the internal audit designation. The CIA has a lot of risk management cooked into it already.
Matt and Beverly, can I add something to this as well? And I
Please.
always actually suggest it to my student. If you actually want to know what destination or what program you should actually do, my suggestion is always look for the job that you want to apply for and see what they need. After a few, you actually see a pattern, and then you can actually kind of work back and see how you can get there. So for example, if I want to be more on the IT side, okay, I look for like 5 jobs. They usually have the same kind of criteria, same kind of requirement. Then you can work your way back and see what you have right now and then work yourself to that point.
That's great advice, because I know it can range in many ways. And sort of related to this topic, Stacey Ann was asking if there are any specific schools for risk managers. Matt, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, there's a few university programs across Canada. Like University of Calgary, I think has an insurance and risk degree or a major in their Bachelor of Commerce degree. There's universities all over the place that have similar risk or insurance programs like that. But I think at the end of the day, like it's like I said before, like whatever you end up studying, you'll have a risk component to it these days. Like I think if you go into IT, if you go into computer sciences is the words that I was looking for. They get into things like how to secure your code and stuff like that. They may not call it risk management, but they talk about vulnerabilities, they talk about threat assessment, they talk about how to measure those things, how to prioritize them, and that sort of thing. And those are all the core functions that you get into with risk management.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I thank you, Lisa, piping in the chat, and Thomas, SFU, BCIT. Absolutely. There are some programs across Canada that combine whether it's business and risk. And you can go to the Insurance Institute's site and also see a listing of some of those schools. Awesome. I saw earlier that Vamsi, you had a question, and I think Thomas was just clarifying with you. You wanted to know categories of risk level in insurance. So in IT, risk level low, medium, or high, or critical. So in insurance, how are risks categorized?
I don't imagine there is actually a set.
Yeah, there is.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, because yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure.
So this is one of the things that I spend a lot of time with is customizing and creating risk impact criteria. And so when you think about insurance as its core function is a financial control. It is there to indemnify you for the financial impacts of a loss. Your insurance isn't gonna grow a new arm. It's not gonna put your business exactly back to the way it was before, but it'll pay for the expenses throughout your loss. So when you're categorizing risk, when you're categorizing insurance risk, it's generally a financial risk. There's other peripheral risks for it. So like with automotive insurance, for example, you can rate it on a legal compliance scale as well. Because if you don't have auto insurance, but you're still driving, that's non-compliance. But it falls into a couple of different categories. You could also throw in contractual compliance as well. If you're not complying to the terms of your contract, you could lose that contract. Most contracts will include insurance requirements. So it's like I said, you can categorize it in a couple of different ways. And then how high it is, like low, medium, or high, like you're saying there, that's a little bit different. Every organization will have a different risk appetite or risk tolerance levels, and your risk criteria might change. So if you have a pretty high, if you're a stupid company and you have a really high tolerance for non-compliance, well, you know, not having auto insurance might be a low risk for you because you're willing to accept that risk. Whereas like if you have very slim margins, the financial risk for insurance might be very, very high. Like you must have the right coverage in place for it. Otherwise you could be insolvent. Whereas public sector, it's generally a little bit on the lower side. Like a public sector body generally doesn't go bankrupt if they have a really bad insurance claim. They might have a deficit, they might have to increase taxes, they might have to borrow money, but they're not going to cease to exist as an organization generally.
Oh, that's great. Thomas?
May I address one of the questions Stacey Ann actually raised some time ago? And I think that's actually a very good question. What is the difference between an underwriter and a risk manager? So I have a take on it. Sorry, Matt.
No, go ahead. I'd love to hear what you think.
this is how I see it. Risk manager, we just talk about what we do. An underwriter basically is a risk manager for an insurance company, because they basically kind of analyze how much risk they're taking on, right, for an insurance company. So I just want to address that, that's all. So
That's exactly what I was going to say too. It's like the underwriter is just part of the risk management for that insurer. They're looking at what types of exposure they have and whether or not to take on a risk.
Awesome. Lisa had a question, Thomas, regarding public sector. How much of the city of Richmond is self-insured? I always thought the city didn't actually purchase insurance, but rather used funds for managing a loss.
but just like any other organization, like and this is the thing, it's moderation, right, Lisa? So if an organization heavily rely on insurance, first of all, if they don't do any efforts to actually kind of mitigate their risk, it's not going to be a good situation for them, because obviously their risk is going to go totally out of whack, right? So you want to actually kind of do a lot of things to manage the risk on your own. However, just managing risk without actually buying insurance, that is also not going to actually help. You want to actually buy insurance for the big thing and kind of like minimize the small things and the frequency, right? So that's actually kind of like the moderation, and you have to kind of play that balance. I can't technically talk about my employer, but we do have insurance, and we do have a high deductible retention, if you will. So, that's actually kind of what I can say. So, but we do actually also do a lot of efforts to try to control and manage our risk as well.
Just to build off that as well, like that's from a municipality standpoint, but like the government of Alberta, for example, self-insures all of the government of Alberta's assets. The government of Canada self-insures all of their own assets. But then government of Alberta has, municipalities in Alberta have access to a reciprocal as well. So there are other models as well. Like when I was the risk manager at that university, Curie is the reciprocal insurer for nearly all universities across Canada. There's 60 some subscribers to it. And so they jointly own, like with a reciprocal insurer, the subscribers own the company. They're the stakeholders for it. And they self-insure a part of it. So Curie will pay a portion of the claims, and then they'll insure for excess layers as well. So public sector actually has a really cool, very broad range of insurability, which is fascinating.
And also add to what Matt was saying. So those reciprocal actually purchase reinsurance on top of that. So they actually kind of see themselves as insured, and then they actually purchase insurance on top of those. So they act as an insurance company, and they buy insurance for their risk.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Javier is asking a question that I wanted to just touch base on, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the role of the risk manager. Javier wanted to know, what's the process, or what do you do when you detect something as suspicious or fraudulent? And that might get into some interesting stories that maybe you've had over the course of your career. Anything you want to share?
This is a personal anecdote, and I don't recommend everyone take this approach, so take it with a big grain of salt. But I think that one of the risks in the risk management role is the Don Quixote, the tilting at windmills. So like you might read about something, you might think that something's a risk to your organization, and if you spend all of your time dealing with all of the issues that come up all the time, you won't have time to do your actual job. And so I generally take the approach of take a step back from things. If things do happen, as long as you've got good records of past occurrences, whether they're claimable events, whether they're performance metrics, whatever the case is, all of those fires that pop up are going to be captured in it. And it's not my job to necessarily jump in front of any of those bullets as they come up, but it is my job to report on them. And so if they're big enough, if they're substantial enough, like when I was at the university, I gave my first report to our executive team for COVID-19 January 15th of 2020. So just before the initial shutdowns happened. And the executive team promptly said, that's not an issue here. There's no confirmed cases in Canada. Get out of here. And I went on vacation. By the time I came back on vacation, it was all hands on deck for preparing for things. So I think, yeah, I think that's kind of my story about, like, you don't necessarily have to take personal ownership over all of the things that could possibly happen. But you do have to look at, do we have the right processes and controls in place that will capture those things so that people have the right information.
Yeah. Fantastic. I wanted to just get your final thoughts, Matt and Thomas. Like, if anyone's kind of sitting on the fence on the line here, wanting to decide, you know, why they should become a risk manager, what would you say? How would you convince them? What's the reality check?
I think that this goes for everything. With any job, do a bit of research on how mature the program is. The risk management role, I think there's a lot of variability in it. Like I've worked with a couple of organizations that I will never talk to again, because not their risk function necessarily, but their organization, their corporate governance, their own practices are so bad that if you try to implement a risk management program there, you're never going to be successful. You're doomed to fail right at the beginning. Whereas there's other organizations that have great stuff in place, and like you can learn a lot there, you can make a lot of impact there. So I think that my kind of story with risk management and picking it as a career is know what you want, try to know what you want, get an idea of what you want, and then do your research on the organizations you're applying for to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for you.
Thomas?
So for the public sector side, I would say 100% echoing what Matt was saying. On the public sector side, it's actually even easier in a sense, because a lot of our memo, a lot of our communication is public, right? So, you know, before you actually are thinking about applying for a job, you can actually look up who is the risk manager and what kind of memo they actually wrote. And it's public record, so you can actually literally see what is going on behind the scene. And is that something, are those projects excite you, right? If they are not something that you care about, and you're gonna be dragging yourself to work every single day, why put yourself through that? On the plus side, I would say, you know what? Risk manager is definitely a rewarding career, at least to me. Also, it may not actually kind of give you millions of dollars, you know, every year, but it's not going to stop. You're not going to starve to death, and you know, it's a good career. And also, you are sitting on the table with the executive, try to help them make the decision. So, like, I think that's actually very exciting as well for me.
Are the risk manager roles, are they in demand in Canada? On the rise, on the down low? Like, what's your opinion on that?
It's kind of regional. I think that risk management roles are more prevalent where there's bigger organizations. You'll always find a handful of small municipalities and smaller provinces and stuff like that. Moving from Alberta to Halifax, I noticed that, like, if you go to like Vancouver area, there were a lot of roles. If you went to Toronto area, there were a lot of roles. Prairies, like your bigger cities, Edmonton, Calgary, had a lot of roles. Regina, Saskatoon didn't have as many, but they were still there. So it's like, because risk management's kind of a function of head office, it's kind of a corporate function. It's kind of, your availability for them is kind of tied to where businesses are headquartered, like major organizations are headquartered.
Yeah. Thomas,
I
I
would
would
also
think every municipality has a risk manager.
most
No?
of them, yes. Some of them
No.
actually have like a kind of a combined role, right? You
Combined.
do risk and maybe even purchasing together. you may do risk and emergency planning together.
Mm.
However, with that said, is that in demand? I think it depends, like Matt was saying, depends on the region. But what I actually see is that a lot of the risk manager in my area, at least, they're retiring or they retired. And so they have to kind of bring in the new blood. So I think that's actually kind of a good time to kind of map your career into that direction, if that's what you want, right?
Yeah.
And start to actually kind of get your tool in your toolbox and get yourself ready, if that's where you want to go be.
Yeah. Final question from Riho. Matt, if you're back in your 20s, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Take it easy. I generally speaking, like people have asked me a lot about like whether or not I'm happy with my job and stuff like that. I think hindsight's always 20/20. I've not done terribly with my career. I didn't finish. I wanted to do a degree right out of high school, and I did a diploma instead. And I always held that against myself. I just finished it last year. So it's like, you've always got time to do it. You've always got time to learn. But it's like that, not having that prevented me from applying for a lot of jobs that I probably could have. Like, I had my first risk management job with no degree, with a couple of diplomas and designations and that sort of thing. So if I was to go back in time, I'd say put less focus on that and put more focus on what you actually want and try to find a way to pursue that.
Thomas?
I honestly do not want to trade any of my experience in my 20s, because I think every single bit of that is gonna actually shape what I do today. So that's what I want to say. So thank you.
Awesome.
I actually want to address one quick question. Stacy Ann asked the last question there.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Succession and mentorship program. I don't think there is a formal one, but what I can suggest is network. Your local insurance institute chapter, they always need people. Your local risk and insurance society, management society always need people. So actually kind of put yourself out there. The more people that you talk to, the more people you meet, you can actually kind of say, oh, put your ear to the ground. Oh, who's hiring? What can I do? Stuff like that. I think that's actually going to be very helpful. So definitely check those out.
Great. I want to thank Matt and Thomas both for your time and your insights tonight. This was absolutely amazing. I actually learned a lot from you because believe it or not, I talk about risk managers, but there's always these other little nips and areas that I just am not familiar with. So this was great. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all of you who are on the line and asking all of your great questions. I hope you'll join us again next month and our months following for our other Insurance 101 sessions. So thank you all and have a wonderful